I mean, it's also really important to...
Yeah, we should email.
And it's user phone to set the URL, like kind of custom stuff. Like that, you might be better off.
Okay, so up next we have Ronnie Burt on building your privacy policy. Ronnie leads the education and hosting services team at InkSub, the company behind WPMU-DEV, Campus Press, and EduBlogs. A former educator, wannabe musician, and math nerd, he is a proud Austinite. So enjoy, guys.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you to come in and listening to what has to be the most exciting topic on the entire show, data privacy and privacy policy. So I know that this is kind of like going to the dentist. We just all need to just get it over with. So I know we just had the introduction, and now this is not going to go next. Well, that's okay. All right, but a little bit about me. I've been using WordPress for over 10 years now. I started while I was teaching. I was freelancing, building sites for some schools, and that eventually snowballed into getting a job with a company that was also building sites and stuff for schools, and that is Campus Press and EduBlogs. And our EduBlogs network has over 4 million sites that students and teachers are using, and WPMU-Dev, it's all one company. And like I said, I was a former math teacher, taught middle school and high school, so I'm also very offended when the audience isn't always like asking to go to the bathroom or not paying attention. But that being said, it is best if we can, there will be time for questions at the end. So I'll definitely make sure that we have time for that instead of the interruptions. So, who's this talk for? First off, maybe by round of applause, if you could clap your hands if you have a WordPress site or any website that doesn't currently have a privacy policy attached. Go ahead, let us know. Great, you're in the right place. Clap your hands, round of applause. If you have a site that has a privacy policy, but you haven't read it, maybe ever, or at least not in the last 6 months. Right? Lots of us. So there's lots of reasons that we can talk about why maybe we need to rethink those practices. I'm gonna see if this guy will work better. Perfect. So first off, these slides are on, I tweeted out, it's pinned to the top of my Twitter profile for today. So it's twitter.com/ronnieburt, and you'll have all of these slides. There's also some speaker notes there on the slides that you can access with some different links and things like that. Beyond that, there's also a link, this link here, that I tweeted out, and the WordCamp New York Twitter handle is tweeting out to this 2-page checklist. It's a shared Google Doc that you can also leave comments and feedback on. That kind of is a checklist of all the things that we're going to talk about, all the things that you can go back and do so that you have a step-by-step reminder as you're going through and actually building those privacy policies or reviewing your privacy policies of what you can do. So hopefully that's handy to you. And back when I first pitched this talk here, I think this didn't exist, but as of May, there is a new tool within WordPress core. So if you go to settings in your WordPress site, if you've updated, which I hope you have, your WordPress core since May, settings privacy, there's a whole page and area dedicated to privacy within WordPress itself. And you'll find that there is a template that you can use, if you haven't seen it already, that is pretty long of almost everything you need to be able to just copy and paste into a privacy policy for your WordPress site. The problem is there's no one-size-fits-all approach here, and there's some work that you still have to do on top of that. This template here actually leaves some sections blank, or some things that you have to go in and change. So it's not something just like a click and you can automatically have, but this gets us so much closer to anything we've ever had before, and it adds all of the WordPress-specific stuff to your WordPress policy by default. So that's a really cool thing. We're really thankful to the WordPress core community privacy team that worked really hard on this. And so we have a myth that you can use a plugin for compliance, or you can use a service for compliance, maybe a tool, anything like that. There's a lot of problems to this myth that maybe many people have that we kind of need to talk through about why this isn't the case. First of all, we have to talk about the word compliance itself. Compliance, by definition, is a snapshot of a point in time of are you meeting specific criteria, specific laws, or specific regulations, and it's just within that time frame when you're evaluating for compliance. But really what we need is ongoing, from start to end, continuing on in the future of our sites that we're hosting, the businesses that we're running, or whatever it is that we're doing, that we're following best practices and following all these things. That is different than compliance. Why should you care about all this? Well, first off, it's the law. And so in my work, we didn't really have anyone doing all of this stuff for our company. And for some really, looking back, dumb reason, I volunteered to handle our GDPR compliance company-wide, how we're managing for all of our customers. And so that's kind of where I got my hands dirty with all of this information. Tried to learn on my own, went to lots of sessions, read a lot of stuff online, and came up with basically the result of the things that we'll talk through today. So that's the second bullet point there, GDPR. You probably got all those emails back in May, like reconfirming everything. Pretty familiar with that. It's European specific, but it really impacted businesses, anyone that had things going on in the US as well. The General Data Protection Regulation. The first bullet point there is the Stop Hacks and Improve Electronic Data Security Act, which is the SHIELDS Act that's currently in committee here in New York in the state legislature that's kind of talking through some of the things that are part of GDPR. And so while this isn't law yet, we know that something like this is probably coming in the near future. There's also a big one that just passed back in June, so just a few months ago, signed by the governor in California, the California Consumer Privacy Act. And that law probably doesn't apply to all of us technically because it has a pretty high cap of if you do a certain amount of business, several millions of dollars of business within California or California customers that it would apply to you. But just knowing that these things continue on, this impacts us all. In fact, there's some news stories that come out pretty frequently that there are different, on the US federal level, laws that are being proposed and things like that that would be kind of hand in hand with what the GDPR did in Europe. So we know it's coming. It's better if we plan as far in advance as possible and that we start doing those best practices now. You came into the room, so I hope you're already convinced of why you should do this anyway. It's just kind of an interesting thing to talk about, the US versus the rest of the world and how we handle data privacy. There are some differences. First off, the US, if this might be a surprise to some of you, we're lawsuit driven. We love litigation and handling things that way. So data privacy, even in like the new California law, what it does is it just says, it enhances your right to sue if you are impacted by a company not taking care of your data. The end result is still a lawsuit that you have to find a lawyer and take care of. So that's how we handle things in the US. Find a lawyer, pay the lawyer, they sue the company, then maybe you get, I think it's $750 per person is the cap that the California law is doing. So I mean, this is kind of, we're lawsuit heavy. The rest of the world, for the most part, especially in the European Union and GDPR, is not that way. It's fines from the government directly to the businesses that say, here's your bill, pay it, We don't do that as much. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to talk about, and that's, if we're lawsuit heavy, you could argue that maybe US businesses can get away with more because it takes someone, you can always fight it kind of thing, instead of the government just slapping you with a fine or taking the money directly from you or closing you down. So your privacy practices, everything that you're doing, it's a risk-based approach. And what that means is, for you, depending on what it is that you're doing, what data you're collecting, who your audience is, is going to be different than some other companies. So your cat blogger might have different needs and expectations than your enterprise business that's working with financial data or something like that. So what that means is I can't give you a privacy policy that's going to work for you, and can't give you a set of practices that you should be doing that's going to work for you, because it really depends on the type of data you're collecting and what you're doing with it. And privacy by design is a whole framework, a way of thought. It was developed, I believe, by some federal or government agencies in Canada, but has since been adopted by countries around the world, that breaks down privacy and how you handle it into 7 specific domains and areas. And there's a whole talk tomorrow, John Ekman, I think tomorrow morning, on privacy by design, or at least he's incorporating that into his talk. So I'll spare you all the intricate details, but the really quick summary that doesn't really do it justice is that you have to always be thinking about privacy from the beginning, before you start your site, before you do anything, and then as you build it, checking it again, then you continue to check it and reassess ongoing basis. It's not something you just do once and forget about it. It's an ongoing thing built into what it is that you're doing. We have to talk about what's personal, what type of data we need to write into our privacy policies. And this is actually the more interesting topic that is still kind of fluid and flexible. All of those laws that I talked about, the Shields law here in New York specifically, that's a big part of the purpose behind the law, is to define specifically what is personal information or what data should be protected in different categories. You have your usual suspects, your name, your social security number, your address, all those sorts of things that we're used to being considered personal data that you wouldn't want public on the web for the most part, or a company turning over to another company or something like that. But there's some other bullet points. You have geolocation, so that would be more than just your address, but IP address can potentially give you narrow down some geolocation information. If you look into Google Analytics, or there's different types of localization information there. You also have mobile devices that track your data, that track where you are, your GPS, longitude, latitude, that sort of thing. That would be protected data. Biometric, so thumbprints. If you're using the fingerprint scanner on your phone, there are things being built into WordPress sites that allow logging in from a fingerprint scanner that's built into your computer or something like that. All of these things may not be totally relevant to your WordPress sites, but are relevant to your personal life and your day-to-day life that we should be aware of. Your browsing history in the new California law specifically is identified as personal information. So if you are collecting information of where your visitors are coming from or what it is that they're doing on your sites, that's browsing history and is protected by laws in different places. Psychometric, I admit that's a word that I kind of had to look up to still understand, but you're learning information. If you have a quiz on your site, anything that can get you into the head of the user, or learning about their thoughts, learning about their intelligence, different things like that. If you're making inferences or predictions on your user based on information or data that you have, that's protected information. So if you're deciding what to show them, what content to show them when they visit based on some, their browsing history, for example, or if they come with a tracking pixel, that'd be protected information. So I share this with you because it's easy to just kind of think names, social security numbers, bank records. It's way more than that. We can't really talk about privacy without also talking about security. And it does you no good to have a privacy policy that says you're doing all of these things and how you're going to handle privacy if you can't keep that data safe from attacks. And so there's already been a couple of talks today on security practices, and that's like a whole session. But these are the 5 kind of bullet points that I wanted to talk through. First up, choose a quality host. Evaluate what it is that they're doing. to keep things safe. Any of the hosts that are out here, sponsoring WordCamps, probably a good place to start. You also have to think about your plugins, your themes, your WordPress core, how you're keeping them updated, all these sorts of things. Because if you are negligent in your responsibility to keep WordPress updated, then that, again, goes back to, well, then why have a privacy policy if you're not going to keep it protected? Make sure you're using SSL. This is kind of a no-brainer these days. Google Chrome's going to show a warning. We've heard that. Probably don't have to go too much into it. Use two-factor authentication. We use Google Authenticator, Google Apps authentication for everything that we do company-wide for every single service. That keeps a log of all activity and requires some sort of, either you get an email, SMS code. You're probably getting familiar with those. Your bank's probably implemented, maybe your work. Definitely turn it on to your email. If whatever you're using for email doesn't offer two-factor authentication, find something else. If yours does and you're not using it, I mean, that's again a no-brainer that everyone should have two-factor authentication on your email. And then find a good security plugin. There are a ton. There's some sponsoring here. Our company has one. There's a ton out there. Just find one, learn what it's doing, and implement it. Get your bases covered. So before you even sit down and look at that nice template that WordPress is giving you for your privacy policy, this is the most painful slide probably. You need to sit down 30 minutes or so, the checklist that I provided, and do a complete data audit of your website. Some of you, this may be easy. Maybe you're not collecting data. Great, fantastic. That's nice. But it's kind of surprising when you go into your data audit what it is that you might be collecting. Is your host collecting and keep storing logs with IP addresses and other activity of your visitors, or using something else? Are you creating an email list? Where are those email addresses being stored? Is it in a spreadsheet or a Google Doc, or is it in MailChimp? You have to, part of good data practices and part of what you put into your privacy policy is that you can articulate all of this if someone asks you, and that it's already kind of written down. So this is just the pre-steps that we need to take before we can get to our privacy policy. Are you using some sort of marketing tool or marketing platform? Are you using a CRM for your customer information and database? All of this needs to be covered by your privacy policy. So it's more than just your website. Do you have cookies on your site? And I roll my eyes at this. I hate those cookie notifications. This site uses cookies. Who reads that? We click accept. It's kind of the dumbest thing that the internet's done. But when I was doing our preparation internally for one of our websites, I used the service cookiebot.com to scan our entire website for the cookies that we were using. And it's embarrassing, but I'll admit it, we had like well over 500 cookies that throughout our, now this one site is large. There's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pages and blog posts on the site, but there were so many cookies on our domain that we basically had no idea. Because long time, we've been writing content on this blog for 13, 14 years. Every time you embed something from some service, there was like 28 cookies from Spotify. And it's like, we don't even show, we had one blog post where someone had embedded some music from Spotify of all places, and we had to hunt it down that added, I think, 20-something cookies to our site. I mean, it was kind of insane. And so you have to be able to track and see what those cookies are. You might be surprised at the number of cookies. WordPress, cookies by default are not bad. WordPress adds cookies out of the box. That's how we track logged in activity. That's how we know when someone leaves a comment. There's all sorts of good, justifiable reasons to have cookies, but you need to be aware of what's there. What kind of contact forms are you using? Where's the data from those contact forms being stored, and what kind of data is it collecting? So you really have to think about these, and this is a big one. It's tempting and to use, and, there's lots of great, we also have a WordPress contact form or a WordPress form creator tool. That information is stored in the WordPress database. The WordPress database is designed for public content out on the web. If you are collecting sensitive data, maybe that doesn't belong in your WordPress database. Maybe that sensitive data that you're collecting needs to be in some service that specializes in collecting and housing sensitive data. So there's lots of stories that we can talk about of where maybe just a simple contact form that seemed harmless was used. There's an example, I don't know the specifics, so we could look it back up, but I can think of a women's health clinic that had a contact form to request an appointment that was using WordPress, that had a contact form. And it was a simple contact form, name, number, email address, and they'll get back to you to schedule an appointment. And this women's health clinic provided services that many people found offensive, and it was hacked, and that contact list of everyone that had requested appointments was discovered, and a group had access to it. So it seems like this contact form, was harmless. You weren't really asking for a lot of things that you would think would be too sensitive, but maybe that data didn't need to live in the WordPress database. So there are reasons why maybe you would use a, by default, most of the time, your WordPress database isn't encrypted at rest, but some of these services would be, and so we can talk. Those are kind of case-by-case examples that we can talk to, but you need to kind of think about it. When you do signups, if you have user accounts that are created, what kind of profile data are you asking for? Do you need all of that profile data? So this is specific to if you have a site where people are signing up to do something. What kind of analytics are you doing? We use a ton. Google Analytics, Mixpanel, there's all like heat tracking map. There's all sorts of different tools, and sometimes you add that code into your site, testing it out, playing with it, and then you decide not to use it, but you forget that it's there and it's still tracking. So these are the kind of things you just kind of have to check, and you'll be surprised at what you might find. And then, really importantly, any e-commerce, any payment information, all that sort of stuff, we should know. We don't need to be storing credit card information in the WordPress database. We need to be using some sort of payment processor or something like that. But so do your complete data audit. Find out, there's probably things that I've missed here that you might be doing on your site that you need to list. And it's a simple list of what it is I'm collecting, why am I collecting it, where am I storing it, what services might I be using, something like that. The next step is to make a data minimization plan. And this sounds dramatic, but it's not as bad as it is, as bad as it seems. You go through, data minimization means, if you don't need it, don't store it, don't keep it. If you're not going to use it again, get rid of it. All you're doing is leaving yourself the opportunity for something to happen in the future. So minimize your footprint of what it is that you're storing, and only keep the things that you really need, or that you're really going to use. Again, there are legitimate reasons why businesses want to collect data, or websites need to have data from their visitors. All great. I'm not suggesting that we don't have any data or anything like that. We just can also be smart about the data that we're collecting and what we're doing with it. Data minimization also means a retention policy. So there are different reasons why you might need to store your customer financial or like transaction records for 1 year, or in some states it might be 7 years that you need to protect yourself by keeping all of your auditors or your accountants happy by keeping this data for a certain long. So this varies depending on your place. You might need to keep it for a significant amount of time, 7 years or something like that, but then get rid of it. There's no reason to store all of your financial history for longer than that if you're not going to use it for some purpose. You need to have a disaster recovery plan. So backups. The biggest kind of mistake maybe that we see is that you rely on your host backup, and maybe that host backup is storing it on the same server as your site. So that backup is stored on the same server as your site. It's not doing a lot of good. That's not the case generally. I mean, hosts are getting better and technology is improving, but that used to be something we'd see a lot. Some of the WordPress backup plugins that are out there will do the same thing. It'll zip up your database and it'll just store it right there where you store all of your other WordPress files. Well, it's not as useful, because if that all gets corrupt or all goes away, well, then your backups are gone. So it's a good idea to have more than one backup solution in place, even a local, and putting it in the cloud somewhere or something like that. And then test it. This is probably the thing that people forget the most. Like, you have your backups, but have you tested it? Have you checked to see that your backups are actually something that's useful to you, to know how to restore if you need to, or something like that? Then we need to be prepared for the worst to happen. You might have a plugin that had a vulnerability that let someone in and they got access to all of your data on your site. almost all of the laws that I listed and anything that's coming, part of the law is a breach notification plan. And that breach notification plan needs to be part of your privacy policy. And so you need to tell people that you're prepared to contact them. I think in GDPR it's 72 hours. Most data privacy, or most privacy policies you'll see is that within 48 hours, just to cover yourself. So what that means that your clock starts ticking as soon as you know there was a breach. So it's not that you have to contact from when the breach happens, because if you don't know about it, you can't contact them, right? But you have a very limited short amount of time to contact anyone that might have been impacted by any data breach that you might have, and that needs to be part of your privacy policy. And so you also, part of the plan is, well, how are you going to contact them? Do you have that contact information easily accessible? What tools are you going to use? I've developed a big database of a template of what I would send out to users if different scenarios happen. So that if it should happen, I already can just copy paste and fill in the bullet points. So I'm not having to, I'm going to be pretty stressed and upset as it is, right? So I don't need to really be thinking about what it would be. Luckily, there's never been a breach or anything like that that we've had to notify people on, but we need to be prepared. As part of WordPress core, along with that other privacy information came out, there's the right to be forgotten you may have heard about, or the right to access your data. So if you haven't played with the new tools that are in WordPress core under the tools menu, I think they're under tools, export data and tools, delete data. There's a whole system built in on how you can get information out of WordPress and send it to people that request it. We've had quite a few people since GDPR was implemented that have requested us for complete report on all the data that we have on them. So we have to be able to create that data and send it to them. I think we'll see it less and less, but it's a good thing to have. And plugins are doing a much better job of using the hooks that are built into WordPress to automatically kind of create these reports for you. So if you're using a contact form tool, many of them will be able to add that to the report automatically, which is pretty nice, or all sorts of other plugins. So now we've done all of this work, we've gone through the checklist, and it's time to publish your privacy policy. All the stuff that I talked about are little sections within your privacy policy that we can't just give you, that you kind of have to work through, work out what's best for you, and put it into the template. So there are two example policies here. Automatic, that's the company behind WordPress.com, and Jetpack, and a bunch of other things. They publish their privacy policy under a Creative Commons license that allows you to use and helpful. Very, very wonderful of them to do so. And we took it, and that was a big part of InkSub is the company that I work for, and that's our privacy policy there that you're more than welcome to use as a guide or to copy paste sections and things like that. We're very happy for that as well. And one thing on that, I'm not a lawyer. I hate when people say that, but I'm not a lawyer, and but a lot of these laws say that your privacy policies have to be written in language that's easily accessible to those that are reading it. So it's a good thing if maybe some lawyers are not writing these policies. It needs to be accessible, it needs to be understandable and easily digested by those that are visiting your site. Then, once you have your privacy policy published, in many cases, you're required to get consent. And this goes beyond, these tips are good for all sorts of consent. Consent for cookies, consent for collecting data. You can no longer, if you aren't aware, have a consent checkbox pre-filled in. It has to be opt-in. So the box needs to be blank and someone needs to actually check the box as part of the consent. You can no longer have just one generic consent that I agree to, this, that, and everything else under the sun. There's many reasons why it needs to be broken apart. So a consent for your privacy policy, a consent for adding to your mailing list. If you have multiple mailing lists, it needs to be a consent for each mailing list, not just in general. I mean, you have to break it down. It needs to be friendly language, kind of like the privacy policy that I was just talking about, and it needs to be just in time. So what that means is you shouldn't just ask for consent the first time they visit your site and that's it. Don't ask them for consent to add to your mailing list until they're actually being added to your mailing list. It needs to be in context of what it is that they're doing. So you might have noticed there were some puns on the slide, especially if you're on this side of the room and could see them. The puns are from our free WordPress newsletter. I didn't write most of those. I stole them from our marketing team. But this is such a boring policy or topic that we needed to do something. And then all the images are from our marketing team, design team, and you'll find them on our blog there. And then happy we have about exactly 10 minutes for questions. Yes?
Well, really just a suggestion, which is some of the worst data breaches have been because consultants had an external drive for a laptop with 2 million names and addresses on it. So my recommendation would be to have an encrypted volume on any external drive or laptop in which there's sensitive data, because it needs to be protected there and not stored.
Okay. Yes?
My company builds it for web developers,
Mhm.
and we're now suggesting to a lot of our people that we've already built websites for, you really need to have privacy policy, and they do the kind of things we were talking about. But they say, well, we give it to them, we're not lawyers, we have lawyers look at this, we don't want to be held legally responsible. But we're trying to figure out how to sell this as a product, and we don't know if we should charge by the hour for how long it takes us, or should we make it a flat rate, or have you heard about anything about how people are selling this?
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the question is like as an agency, or maybe this would, for any freelancers, anyone that's building sites for clients, and as part of that work, you are helping them develop their privacy policy, how do you charge for that? Yeah, so I would say that if they're starting with the WordPress tools that are already built in, if it's a WordPress site, I think by the hour makes sense, because we don't know how long that audit's gonna take, right? Yeah, so in most cases, I would say by the hour, but maybe you can give them an estimate of what I would normally do with our clients that come in. Of, on average, I'm seeing this takes us between 3 and 5 hours if you don't have anything crazy, that we have to go through, or whatever it may be that you're working through. So that I think by the hour makes sense. Yeah. Yes?
Is there a plugin for WordPress that will encrypt data into the database that you collect from?
So the question was, is there a plugin with WordPress that will encrypt data in the database level? Well, you can set up WordPress in your host where you can encrypt the whole database at rest. My understanding is that sometimes that's a performance hit, and so if you're not collecting sensitive data and you want to optimize site, but I think some of that's also changing. Encryption's getting better.
So maybe there's something like Gravity Forms has their own encryption in context.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never looked into that. That's interesting. I think I'll make a note though to see if you are collecting specific data, how you can put it into your database. It seems like that would make sense that there would be tools that could cache it or encrypt it on the way in, and then I don't know how they would get it back out though. That's an interesting question. Yes.
You mentioned plugin or something that you use for to know how many cookies your website is collecting. Is there something like that?
Yeah, I mean, we use CookieBot. I'm not like endorsing whatever we pay CookieBot to do that for us, and it's got a free version if your site has like under 100 pages or something. That will identify all the cookies that are on your site. And then as part of your privacy policy, you'll see there's a place to list your cookies. Somewhere within your site where you list your cookies and what they do and why they're there. CookieBot kind of automates that for us.
How about other plugins like for other stuff? Like for example, if you, like you say that the form that you don't know you're collecting certain things and not the other stuff. If there's something that will tell you how many things you're collecting.
I know that on the enterprise side, we have customers that use services that scan their different tools, and it has to be something that's kind of obvious, like social security number. We know that it's going to have this many digits, and usually it's hyphen or credit card numbers that follow these things. That will look for those patterns and alert them to it. I don't even know what those are called. I wish that would be like I think an important service that will look at the data that's on contact form and just suggesting this looks like it may be sensitive.
Yeah, because you put all these plugins and you don't know which one you are collecting and which one is just.
Right. So as part in WordPress.org, there are hooks and things that plugin developers can do to show they're supposed to list now with new updates what they might be collecting. The problem from our end is we don't know how our users are going to actually use the plugins that we develop. So we can't tell you that you're going to be collecting this type of data because we don't know that you really will be. So we have to just be kind of generic about this has the potential to collect this sort of data. There are some things it's obvious, like we know it's collecting IP address or something, so we can list that. Others, we're not sure.
So what area would you say that employees have to notify what things are?
I can't remember where it is in the README file or something on WordPress.org that that will list. There's some examples of plugins that I know that are doing that. Most of ours, like Smush is one that I know that we list with it. Yeah, it's just called Smush. Yes.
How do you know if you need to get consent first? Like,
If
what-
you are collecting anything that you think might be private and
So-
storing it, you need to get consent.
So IP addresses, you said, has the potential or no, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. So people get around it in a lot of ways. A lot of this is like yet to be decided by case law, and it's frustrating because we're in kind of this awkward stage of not really sure, not really knowing exactly how things should be done. So what I've seen and what we're doing is listing in our privacy policy that we're using Google Analytics. There are tools within Google Analytics where you can minimize the data and or anonymize the data, so it won't give you the full IP address. It'll just list like a few of the last numbers or something. So it's not, it's anonymized. So some of these services will anonymize the data, and that's better. Then you don't have to ask permission if it's anonymized.
And just for the laws, like, we're a public library, so
Mhm.
we don't know, we're really meant for local use, but I get traffic from, all over the world, which is always weird. So as laws change all over the world, do you have to accommodate every country with a law that's out there? Or?
I mean, the cynical answer, I think, would be if you're just where you're locally. And a lot of it depends on, so like we do business with customers in most countries, but we don't want that turned off from our potential market. So we have to be careful. But if your market and who you're serving regularly is local, then I would just worry about local.
Thank you.
Mhm. Yes.
I recently seen a site that didn't have no SSL, the lock on top, and they was collecting data from the credit card purchases. And in the credit card purchases, while you're typing in your personal information and your credit card number, there's still no SSQ lock, but then somewhere in between when they're processing, you may see a blip and stuff. So, I mean, this site is totally unprotected. Am I incorrect here?
It sounds like when you're actually typing, so the question was, you're visiting a website, it doesn't have
And it's
HTTPS,
a
it doesn't have
e-commerce.
SSL, it's an e-commerce site, and as you're typing in the credit card information, it doesn't say HTTPS in the address bar. Then no, you would not be protected, because somehow that credit card number is gonna be transmitted somewhere.
Unprotected, but then like as something happens, you see like a little blip where,
Because-
because they had a third party of PayPal.
Right. Yeah, PayPal, all payment processors are gonna, usually what happens is you get sent off of that site to put in your credit card information. That's protected. And then, so like, us as a company, we don't ever see that credit card information. We'll just get the last four digits.
No, when I noticed it, it was because a client was talking to me about it. And so I watched her do it, and it was so weird
Yeah.
that it was an e-commerce.
Yeah, I would stay away.
Yeah. Because that
Yeah.
shows, and when
Yeah.
I called the company and spoke to them about it, and the man was like, oh no, we don't need to have that because we dealing with PayPal, but the link is on their site.
Yeah, and there's like, and Chrome, for example, should spot that and.
It has
and
not.
Yes, that's, stay away.
Interesting.
Yeah, stay away. Let's see, I think we have like time for one, maybe two more. Go ahead.
I had exactly the same experience with Google in like I got 5
Mhm. Yeah, so the question was to use CookieBot, or you've got a list of cookies. I, as a non-developer, look at our cookie list and I have a hard time discerning where a lot of those cookies are actually coming from. I mean, so CookieBot, I think, gave me a page at least, so I could look at the page and see if there was anything different about that page than elsewhere. If it was throughout your whole site, then that would be harder. Usually the cookies have some sort of identifier in the description of like at least, like I knew it was Spotify in the example I gave because it actually had like, I don't think it said all of Spotify, but it had like Spot, and it got me in the right direction. But I don't know that there's, you could, I would try just Googling that cookie and see if it comes up somewhere else, in someone else's privacy policy, and see if they tell you. That would be just the, like the actual text of the cookie in the header there. Last one, last question, we all good? All right, well, I'll be around, happy to chat, and thank you very much.